into it.
Yo, what the fuck is going on? Are we really blinded by this mirage of propaganda? Do we really not see that the system has us going against each other and fighting back and forth while they control us like puppets? Do we not see that we're in a state of no peace? But to have peace is to have understanding, and the understanding we seek seems so far away in a society so divided. We no longer need a colonizer to do the work of a colonizer, tearing each other down, discrediting each other's historical struggle, causing psychological and physical warfare. Like that doesn't fall right into the hands of the man that created the system we've assimilated so perfectly into? I refuse. I refuse to participate, understanding that we were all products of survival in a race of world domination and global power. But the hardest thing to admit is that we were victims and we are products of survival. And understanding that struggle is what unifies us. But somehow the conversations are all around who's black, who's not, who's Latino, who's not, who's native, who's not, whose land, your land, my land, her land, but no plan? God damn. This shit sounds like a scam to distract us from the plan at hand planned by the man who created the system we've assimilated into. So are we really far off from where they want us to be? Fighting and bickering like it's the new TV for public consumption of the destruction of the oppressed? Really? We've allowed this dark cloud to consume us, a full eclipse. It's like Moondog Punisher snatched the sun and blew it out with a kiss, leaving us in capital punishment's grip, the devil's pit, the land of chaos, self-destruction, and no peace. Never forget.
Top of the afternoon, everybody. Peace and blessings and positivity. We are back at it with the book club, continuing where we left off of Puerto Rico and national history. Everybody on TikTok, salute to everybody. Tap the screen, share this live. If this is your first time here, I do believe in socialism, free education, free housing, and free healthcare. So by tapping the screen, sharing this live, it's just showing me a little bit of socialist love and support to be able to reach the masses. So tap that screen. Don't forget, everybody on TikTok, we are live on YouTube. So if you want to be able to catch up with the live later on or go come back and listen to the prior books before that, we are also live on YouTube. Salute to everybody on YouTube. But yeah, without further ado, I want to jump straight into the book. If you guys could do me a favor, just participate, just tap that screen. Let's set the first goal to 2,000. Let's set the first goal to 2,000. But without further ado, let's jump right into it.
Imagining the Great Puerto Rican Family. Different social worlds coexisted in 19th century Puerto Rico. One was rural and the other urban, but colonial administrators were at the top of both. They were followed by plantation owners in the countryside and factory owners in cities and urban areas. Merchants bridged the two groups. As in the rest of Spanish America, Criollos and Peninsulares vied for status and control. Peninsulares held greater privileges and power in the social hierarchies that operated in Puerto Rico. In the towns of Lares, Yauco, San Germán, and Mayagüez, for example, the commerce and plantation systems were dominated by Corsican and Majorcan immigrants. They hardly ever employed criollos, adding fuel to the already tense relationships among the elites. The planter class had amassed great wealth on the backs of enslaved people until the financial challenges of the 1860s. Sugar sweetened teas in England and coffee in Spain, but it also depended on horrific forms of labor exploitation. When U.S. southern states re-entered the international markets after the Civil War, 1861 to 65, Puerto Rico's economy contracted, and another commodity began dominating production and exports: coffee. The coffee trade was less dependent on enslaved labor, in part because unemployed, freed laborers lived in the mountainous regions where its production took place. Sharecroppers, laborers tied to the hated logbook system, and poor peasants became a stagnant and floating group that was understood to be at the bottom of the social hierarchy. Some criollos dreamed of freedom and the creation of the sovereign Puerto Rican nation-state from within the archipelago, while others were doing the same in exile. One such criollo was Ramón Emeterio Betances. His mother had died when he was 10 years old, and his father, a wealthy plantation owner from the western town of Cabo Rojo, sent his son to study in France in the custody of family friends, a connection that was made possible through his Freemason contacts. Betances received his primary education in Toulouse, later making his way to Paris to study medicine as the city was shaken by the 1848 revolutions. It was his first lesson in political activism. Later in life, he asserted with pride that when the Republic called, he became a soldier for the Republic of France. After finishing his studies, he returned to Puerto Rico just as a cholera epidemic spread through coastal towns, killing thousands of people. He quickly opened his doors to anyone in need, gaining the townspeople's respect and the nickname Doctor of the Poor. Betances was part of a generation of young intellectuals who received their formal education in Europe. His experiences fighting for the French Republic fired his political imagination. Influenced by liberalism, he openly advocated for the abolition of slavery, individual rights, and democratic elections. These ideas were perceived as a threat by the Spanish government. Betances and his close friend Segundo Ruiz Belvis were expelled from Puerto Rico twice for their abolitionist activities. They were once accused of buying enslaved infants during baptism and immediately granting them their freedom. In 1867, the government ordered their arrest, but they escaped to the neighboring Dominican Republic and made their way to New York City, where they joined a community of Latin American revolutionaries. These revolutionaries wrote a series of incendiary texts clandestinely or from exile, calling for Puerto Ricans to take up arms. "Long live the revolution," and "Long live Borinquen," punctuated their leaflets and manifestos, which were probably printed abroad and later put into circulation by the underground network organizing the forthcoming revolution. One can only imagine how it must have felt to carry a bag or briefcase full of such materials, to know those words were printed on paper, words that called for another social order, words that could send a person to the execution wall. In 1867, Betances drafted a document called the 10 Commandments of Free Men. It was an ultimatum to the Spanish crown. If Spain feels capable of giving us and gives these rights and liberties, wrote Betances, then it can send us a captain general or governor, made of straw, which we will hang and burn on the days of Shrovetide to commemorate all the Judases that have sold us up to this day. The demands read as a quintessential liberal manifesto. The abolition of slavery was called for, as was the right to vote and freedom of association, the press, and commerce, among other things. Knowing that Spain would never consent to the demands, Betances used the 10 Commandments to document and promote liberal ideas. But the revolution was not just rooted in a call for more individual rights. For Betances, and possibly for some of those who risked their lives in the endeavor, the revolution would create the Puerto Rican Republic. In many ways, the Puerto Rican nation was already a reality because there was a widespread sense of belonging distinct from affiliation with Spain. As one of the revolutionary leaflets noted, "Everything separates us from Spain." It continued, "The primitive race was destroyed. After that, the African race was scarred, and with them the criollo was enslaved, dejected, despised, asking for justice to the godly skies.
Tap that screen,
And
tap
they
that screen.
still dare to scream at us, 'You don't want to be a Spaniard?' Well, good. You'll be Indian or mulatto. So what? Since when has it not been more valuable to be the victim's son rather than the executioner's brother?"
Really quick, I mentioned it on the last live in the last chapter, but please go check out Puerto Rico Revolt for Independence, El Grito de Lares. This is good. It's by Olga Jimenez. This is the second book that I have on her. I said it was in Spanish yesterday. The other one that I have from her is in Spanish. This one's actually in English. So you can actually go check this one out. If you're ever in Old San Juan, there's a bookstore in Old San Juan where they got a lot of revolutionary content. I'll actually go get the little flyer and stuff over there so you can see the location. But if you want to dig more deep in on the Lares Revolt, Ramon Emeterio Betances, please check out this book. It's a phenomenal book. Tap that screen, share this live, and don't forget we are also live on YouTube. We don't know where TikTok is going to be in the next couple of weeks. So if you guys want to catch more of the book club and continue to follow with the content, do me a favor. It's the same name, Afro Taino 88, over on YouTube. Just hit subscribe. You ain't even got to stick over there around to watch, but if you want to guys catch it later on, you can catch it there. You can always come back.
The organizing was not limited to the Puerto Rican archipelago. Revolutionaries in New York, the Dominican Republic, and St. Thomas created an impressive communications network. On October 27, 1867, as Betances worked to garner support and secure weapons in the Caribbean, Ruiz Belvis traveled to Chile in search of diplomatic allies. They were counting on the solidarity of their Spanish-American brothers. As Simón Bolívar had noted decades prior, the liberation of the Americas would not be complete without the liberation of Cuba and Puerto Rico. Unfortunately, Ruiz Belvis died of natural causes 4 days after arriving in the port of Valparaíso. This was the revolution's first major setback. Despite the loss of Belvis and the failure of his mission, preparations for the armed insurrection continued. The revolution would begin on September 29, 1868, in the northern town of Camuy. Other towns were to follow Camuy's lead. It was expected that more than 20 secret societies would follow suit. Meanwhile, Betances planned to arrive with a shipload of weapons and ammunition from St. Thomas. None of this happened. Rumors had been circulating about possible insurrections, and Spanish authorities were on high alert.
Listen.
Their suspicions were confirmed on the night of September 20, when the nephew of one of the revolutionary leaders overheard a conversation between members of Camuy's Lanzador del Norte secret.
Remember, the last chapter was going in depth on how isolated and locked down they had Puerto Rico because of the influences from the other Caribbean islands, specifically Haiti and the Haitian Revolution, how they had everything on high alert, how they had their own version of what like the Calpetas are to us today, or the COINTELPRO. Like, they were really trying to keep a log and keep people in Puerto Rico. They even had it to where they didn't want nobody to leave. They wanted to keep track of everyone. They wanted to make sure the population stayed within the island, to not have any influence, either escape or come into the island.
And alerted the authorities. The repressive apparatus was immediately activated. Tense discussions and rapid decision-making among the leaders ensued. After years of planning and organizing, the revolution now needed to happen in less than 48 hours and begin in an entirely different town, Lares. Since most of the secret societies were not aware of what had happened, those who did start to fight had to hope that their comrades would join them once they heard that the revolution had begun. And in fact, some revolutionaries only found out about the change of plans when they were arrested by Spanish forces. On the night of September 23rd, 1868, Lares was festive. A few hours prior, nearly 600 freed and enslaved residents had gathered on Manuel Rojas's estate. Rojas was a plantation owner who had lost everything in the recent economic crisis. Some weeks before, he had declared bankruptcy after failing to pay back loans that he had struggled to service for years. Rojas was also president of the Junta Centro Bravo No. 2, one of the secret societies that had been organizing the Puerto Rican Revolution for months. In a society where public gatherings made participants a target for the government and where publicly speaking about politics could lead to imprisonment, it would have been euphoric to hear hundreds of people shouting for the liberation of Puerto Rico that night at Manuel Rojas's estate. There were people from all social classes in the crowd, Enslaved people were offered freedom for participating. Day laborers who had been forced to work under the hated libreta system made a bonfire with their logbooks. While women took part in the conspiracy, they were not part of the military action. Passion was abundant even without weapons and military preparation. There were few horses and only a handful of rifles. The rest of the rebels armed themselves with knives, sticks, and machetes. When it was time to depart, Manuel Rojas gave a speech to rally the troops, who shouted, "Death to Spain! Long live liberty! Long live free Puerto Rico! Liberty or death!" as they marched toward Lares. The revolution had begun. In a few hours, they had taken the town and declared the Republic of Puerto Rico, along with a provisional government. Bernabe Paul, a mixed-race man recently expelled from his civilian job because of his skin color, was appointed Secretary of State. The newly established government also drafted a declaration from Puerto Rico to the world. In its first official communication to the international community, Bernabe Paul wrote, "Since the moment has arrived, when arms need to be taken to sanctify the cause for rights, we are determined to die rather than to continue under Spanish domination.
Listen.
And in order for it not to be characterized as a riot or revolt of a bad type, and to be considered a patriotic movement with tendencies to shake off the ominous yoke and create a free nation, and we stated for the whole world to know." Instead of marching on to the next town, San Sebastián del Pepino, the rebels decided to celebrate a Te Deum, a religious mass of gratitude, the first and last religious service to be celebrated in the brief existence of the Republic of Puerto Rico. Others looted the town's stores, while a bonfire fueled by debt records lit up the night. These celebrations gave Spanish reinforcements time to arrive from different parts of the island. When the rebels arrived in San Sebastián after dawn on September 24th, they had lost the element of surprise. After multiple attacks, they were unable to take the town's plaza. Better equipped and more highly trained soldiers forced them to retreat into the mountains. Perhaps they could take cover until Betances arrived with reinforcements, or wait for other secret societies to begin their attacks. The Spanish government ordered reinforcements from the nearby town of Mayagüez and began sweeping the area. In St. Thomas, the Spanish pressured local authorities to confiscate Betances' boat, El Telégrafo, along with the weapons and ammunitions he had been gathering over the previous year. Betances fled the island before authorities could catch him. While historians often argue that the revolution only lasted about 48 hours, it seems that guerrilla tactics continued for at least 2 months. By December, 551 people had been arrested in connection with the insurrection. 3 of them were women, and 49 were enslaved people. Of those, 7 were sentenced to death, and 80 died in prison, victims of yellow fever caused by unsanitary prison conditions. Those who survived were set free in January 1869. The Lares rebels were not members of a single class or social group. They were a rowdy gathering for whom independence and liberation meant different things. There were planters like Manuel Rojas who had lost everything and perhaps wanted power. Others, like Bernabe Paul, who had been denied an administrative job because of his race, were disillusioned by the racist structures of Spanish colonialism. Enslaved people joined in hopes of attaining freedom and liberation, while day laborers sought better living conditions. There might have been a concerted class project from elites who wanted to topple the Spanish administration to establish their own, but solely focusing on the elites would be an act of historical injustice to those who sacrificed their lives to imagine the possibilities of living otherwise. Imagining the nation. While the Lares revolutionaries failed in their military endeavors, they won a decisive symbolic battle. There had been separatist actions and attempts throughout the 19th century, but Lares marked a turning point. It made clear to the Spanish authorities what must have been obvious to many, that a unique sense of Puerto Ricanidad had been built in opposition to Spain. The revolutionaries fought to build the nation's political apparatus. The Spanish crown faced other problems in late 1868. The Puerto Rican Revolution was part of a broader movement expanding through the Spanish Empire. Authorities were still chasing Puerto Rican revolutionaries in the mountainside when, on October 10th, Cuban revolutionaries rose up in arms. The Grito de Yara proclaimed Cuba's independence and the establishment of a provisional government. While it started small, by the 1870s the movement for Cuban independence had attracted more than 40,000 volunteers from all social classes and races. Unlike Lares, which was immediately suppressed and limited to a few municipalities, the Cubans launched a 10-year war that set the foundations for 3 decades of struggle. In Spain, where liberals were discontented with the government of Queen Isabella II, another revolution was underway. In 1868, a rebellion led by none other than Juan Prim y Prats successfully overthrew the queen and created a regency. Prim y Prats had served as Captain General of Puerto Rico in 1847, although his mandate only lasted a year before he was removed for his dictatorial tendencies. It was under Prim y Prats's rule that the Bando contra la Raza Negra was passed, giving slave owners unlimited power to exploit, punish, and legally murder enslaved peoples.
Tap that screen, share this live. I need the participation of everybody to be able to shake up the algorithm. TikTok is already suppressing a lot of language, a lot of conversation. So please, for us to be able to make a difference in this hallway, just make some noise. Tap that screen, share this live. And we talked about this yesterday. When did Puerto Rico abolish slavery? Somebody throw it in the comments.
The so-called Glorious Revolution in Spain inaugurated years of political instability, including the assassination of Prim y Prats. Eventually, the revolution shaped the political conditions that led to the creation of the First Spanish Republic in 1873. While the Republican government only lasted 11 months, it was a political experiment that sent shockwaves across the deteriorating Spanish Empire.
1873 is a big year.
New laws and regulations granted Puerto Ricans the freedom of the press and freedom of association, and led to the creation of new political parties. A convergence of factors, including the agency of enslaved peoples, the proliferation of abolitionist politics among the intellectual elite, and recent events in the Spanish Peninsula, led to the approval and implementation of the Moret Law in 1870. This legislation, drafted by liberal intellectuals, was seen as a step toward abolition because it granted freedom to children born to enslaved mothers.
Listen.
The Moret Law, the symbolic impact of Lares, and the unwavering insurgency in Cuba all signaled to Spain the threat of independence.
He said 1870.
And 3 years later, on March 22nd, 1873, the Spanish courts declared the abolition of slavery in Puerto Rico. Freedom, however, was not immediately granted to enslaved individuals.
Nope.
Instead, they needed to enter into contractual agreements with their former masters,
Pay attention.
or find new ones, for a period of 3 years. While the Moret Law promised freedom, Puerto Ricans remained trapped within decay.
1873, they passed a bill to abolish slavery, which technically didn't initially abolish slavery. They had to have an understanding with their DK so-called slave owners. But then, now fast forward a few years, right? 1873, the abolishment of slavery, a lot of societal issues and change. What happens in 1898? Right? A few years later, 1873, the abolishment of slavery. 1898, what happens in 1898? And what is the year differential from when we abolished slavery and then we had that impact in 1898? Mind you, Cuba abolished slavery in, what was it, 1870, 18, what is it, 1876 or 1886? 1886, and Brazil was in 1888.
As new technologies modernized the plantation system in the last 3 decades of the 19th century, the worlds of letters and politics operated within the scope and at the behest of the colonial government.
I chopped it up a little bit, but 1873, Puerto Rico abolished slavery, Cuba abolished slavery in 1886, and Brazil abolished slavery in 1888. What happens in 1898?
Political parties could only advocate for full integration into the imperial orbit, or, in the most radical case, some degree of autonomy. Separatist ideas were not allowed to be publicly professed or promoted. That does not mean such ideas did not exist. While coffee and tobacco were the main exports, sugar would make a comeback in the next century. Meanwhile, liberals, professionals, and the planter class.
What happens in the next century?
All came together around the foundational
Plug
myth
it in.
that operates to the present day.
Plug it in.
The idea of the great Puerto Rican family. The great Puerto Rican family.
Really quick, everybody tap that screen, share this live. Let's set a goal to 10K, guys. Let's get the participation of everybody. If you're not at work and you at home, if you're at work and you can slide the phone to your knee, just tap. Let's shake up the algorithm. Don't forget, we're also live on YouTube. So if you want to go back and listen to what you missed out or catch up on the prior chapters from the other day and the other books that we put out, please do me a favor. It's Afro Taino 88. Go hit subscribe, catch up when you got some free time. But let's shake up this algorithm, because TikTok definitely been suppressing my lives, and it's been going on for the last 2-3 months. So if you guys could do me a favor, this is what's discouraged me from getting off TikTok, is the suppression. Let's tap that screen. Let's get the participation of everybody. Again, as a unit, we could definitely get things going.
In November 1870, with just 5 days between their inaugural conventions, Puerto Rico's first political parties were...
And what I want everybody to understand is that we are a continuation from history. History is not in a whole different book or a whole different aisle in the library. We're a living continuation. To understand what we've gone through today and what we're going through today, or to even to figure out a way to change our dynamics today, we have to understand history. We have to understand how things evolved and how they got from point A to point B. Removing our emotions for the moment from it, so that way we can analyze and really critique the situation and come up with a solution. And then when we on our own time, we can put our personal emotions involved and curse the shit out and feel how we want to feel. But before we get to that point, emotions aside, listen to understand. 2 ears, 1 mouth. Tap that screen. Let's keep it going.
The Liberal Reformist Party and the Conservative Party. Suffrage was limited to property-owning individuals who were wealthy, and nearly all enfranchised voters were white. Elections were held to select deputies in the Spanish courts and a handful of local senators. In the first elections of 1871, Liberals won 14 out of Puerto Rico's 15 districts. The Liberal tide had changed by 1878, when Conservatives won every single district.
Wonder why.
European progress and Enlightenment ideas animated and inspired Puerto Rican intellectual elites. The development of electoral politics was tied to the emergence of Puerto Rico's public sphere, a space outside the government where individuals and citizens sought to transform society and encourage political action. Energized by the proliferation of print media in the form of newspapers, books, and plays, cities hosted traveling theatrical companies and housed bookstores while luxurious and modern architecture graced the avenues. Many of the country's leading intellectuals had studied and debated ideas in European classrooms, caroused through the streets of Madrid or Paris, and returned home with a desire to modernize Puerto Rico. World's fairs had given them a glimpse of the globe through a highly Occidental and Western lens. Asia and Africa were imagined as barbarous places and people to negate and move away from. The Puerto Rican elite, seen as lesser than by the imperial metropolis, sought refuge in Western civilization even when they were not deemed worthy of it. For some, Spain no longer promised modernity, so they dreamed about Parisian luxury, while envying London's capitalist ethos from their elegant colonial houses in Ponce, San Germán, or San Juan. Having absorbed ideas about progress and civilization, the Puerto Rican elite imagined themselves as capable leaders, masters, and teachers of those they considered to be the lazy, indolent, and uncivilized masses. Regardless of what the intellectual elite believed, the laboring masses also actively participated in political and intellectual exchanges. El Artesano, the first artisan-led newspaper, was published in 1874, and it was soon followed by other publications whose titles document the emergence of an incipient working-class consciousness. El Obrero, Eco Proletario, Justicia, El Clamor Obrero, and El Criterio Libre. Makeshift libraries and night schools were established in these years, as well as literary soirees, banquets, and mutual aid societies. The Sociedad Protectora de la Inteligencia del Obrero, an organization founded in the 1880s, was particularly explicit about their intellectual aspirations. It was a project that will bring as its consequence intellectual uplift of the working class, making it stronger and respectable while guaranteeing its future. Working class people were actively self-fashioning their identities as intellectuals, but were mostly ignored in conversations about the country's development. Of chief importance to the intellectual elite, primarily young criollo and foreign-educated professionals, was the notion of the great Puerto Rican family as a racial democracy discourse that sought to create the illusion of consensus. Through the efforts of elites who used politics, literature, and history to give shape and substance to the idea, everyone belonged to the Puerto Rican nation. Given the patriarchal codes of the time, only men were allowed to speak in this imagined family. As the heads of the great Puerto Rican family, men from the upper classes spoke on behalf of the masses, who could join the family, but only as accommodating, silenced, and ultimately whitened subjects. In fact, liberal intellectuals who led the abolitionist debates in the Spanish courts created a discourse of gratitude. The formerly enslaved, elites thought, needed to be grateful for their freedom. Of course, this meant willfully ignoring the agency of those who'd led dozens of revolts, created maroon communities, and participated in subtle and undocumented acts of resistance. The foundation of a unifying national myth also necessitated a creation of the past. In the 1850s, a new generation of Puerto Rican students in Madrid began laying the foundation for the study of history. One of them was Alejandro Tapia y Rivera, a quintessential man of letters. Tapia y Rivera was born in 1826 to a well-off family descended on both sides from Spanish nobility. His father was also a military official. His family traveled between Madrid and Puerto Rico, so Tapia y Rivera played in Madrid as a child, but received his education in San Juan. As a young man, he dueled with a military officer. With the elite in 19th century Puerto Rico, honor was an important trait to defend at all costs. and while he survived, Governor de la Pezuela ordered his exile, which led him back to Madrid in 1849. Spain at that time was filled with young Puerto Rican intellectuals yearning for their idealized island, with Barcelona becoming an important intellectual hub. No less than 3 books documenting customs, songs, and poems from Puerto Rico were published in the 1840s. Around this time, Manuel Alonso Pacheco, a physicist and man of letters, also published El Jíbaro, one of the first attempts to portray Puerto Ricanidad through literature. When Tapia y Rivera arrived in Madrid, Puerto Rican students and intellectuals were busy imagining the nation through its past. On March 20th, 1851, they created the Sociedad Recolectora de Documentos Históricos de San Juan Bautista de Puerto Rico, Society for the Recollection of Historical Documents relating to San Juan Bautista of Puerto Rico. The group included men who would dominate Puerto Rican intellectual and political circles in the coming decades. Román Valdoriotti de Castro, José Julián Acosta, Calixto Romero, Ramón Emeterio Betances, and Segundo Ruiz Belvis, among others. As young students, they spent their time browsing old libraries, sifting through archives, and reading moldy documents. This was not a mere intellectual exercise, but an attempt to trace the historical coordinates of the Puerto Rican nation. Soaked in the positivist intellectual trends of their times, they imagined history not as an interpretation of the past, but as something static that could be reached through primary documents. There was a particular fascination with the indigenous past, something that both Betances and Tapia y Rivera explored in literary novels as well. In exile, they felt what it meant to be Puerto Rican. While some were forced to live in perpetual exile, most of the Sociedad Recolectora's members eventually made their way back to Puerto Rico. Tapia y Rivera, for example, edited multiple newspapers, joined the Liberal Reformist Party, and dictated courses on art and literature at the Puerto Rican Athenaeum, a hub for Puerto Rico's emergent world of letters and public sphere. In fact, Tapia y Rivera first proposed the Athenaeum's creation in 1855, although it was nearly 20 years before its doors opened to the public. These men of letters were not all educated in literature. Many of them were professionals from the worlds of law and medicine. Some advocated for women's participation in the country's intellectual life, but these spaces were male-dominated. Women's intellectual pursuits were limited to their homes, where they could hold soirees or tertulias. And while some newspapers included women's sections, periodicals too were mostly written by men. As these intellectuals imagined Puerto Rico's foundations, they also sought to reformulate the country's relationship to its imperial metropolis. The Liberal Reformist Party became a political battleground between two factions that held different views on the right relationship with their Spanish counterparts. A faction led by José Celso Barbosa, a black U.S.-educated physician, advocated holding out against conservative politicians in Madrid to gain autonomy. They hoped that the situation in Cuba, which had been an intermittent war for independence since 1868, would eventually grant Puerto Ricans greater freedoms. Luis Muñoz Rivera, a lawyer, poet, and journalist, disagreed. He led another faction willing to negotiate with Spain in order to secure political gains for Puerto Rico. Eventually, these tensions led to the creation of two different parties, the Autonomous Party and the pure, orthodox, and historical Autonomist Party.
Pay attention, pay attention.
Both were fighting for an autonomous, self-ruled Puerto Rico,
thank you.
But they differed in their strategies. Supporting autonomy could be dangerous. The year 1887 is known by Puerto Rican historians as the Terrible Year. Spanish colonial authorities persecuted and in some cases tortured autonomists. After a tense election in 1886, conservatives began physically attacking autonomists and targeting their properties. In response, several secret societies, including La Torre del Viejo, the Old Man's Tower, and Los Secos, the Dry, in reference to those born in Puerto Rico, were formed to advocate a boycott of conservative-owned, meaning Spanish-owned, businesses. Fearing that autonomists were behind these societies, Governor Romualdo Palacios González ordered the arrest of key autonomist leaders, including Román Valdoriotti de Castro, through a system known as decompontes, pacifiers. The plan was to torture them into confession. The civil guard broke into dozens of autonomists' houses, arrested them, and dragged them to solitary places to torture them. These actions horrified Puerto Rico's political elite and had immediate ramifications in Madrid. Palacios González was accused of abusing his power, and Spain's Council of Ministry agreed to his removal on November 9, 1887. Meanwhile, autonomists debated about calling for an end to their boycott on Spanish merchants and began considering which party they should negotiate with in Spain. Tensions among the autonomists came to the fore once again over whom to trust in Madrid. The faction led by Luis Muñoz Rivera wanted nothing to do with the local Spaniards, but was willing to compromise with conservative factions in the metropole. In the neighboring island of Cuba, another war was declared in 1895. It had been years in the making, with committees organizing in Cuba, New York, and Florida. This time, Cuban revolutionaries brought the war to Havana. Victory, and with it independence, was seen as a possibility. In October 1895, in dialogue and collaboration with their Cuban counterparts, a group of Puerto Rican separatists created the Puerto Rican Revolutionary Committee in New York City. Some Puerto Ricans, like the Arecibo poet Pachín Marín, joined the Cuban revolutionaries and died fighting in their ranks. Counting on the pressure generated by the war in Cuba, Luis Muñoz Rivera and a faction within the Autonomist Party revived...
That is the father of Luis Muñoz Marín, the first governor under U.S. colonial rule. That's his dad. He was the first elected governor de Puerto Rico before U.S. occupation, just to give you context. And that's the vehicle that his son ran his campaign off, is what his father created, which is his newspaper outlet. So, just throwing that out there.
A decades-old debate about creating strategic pacts with progressive parties in Spain. After several assemblies and internal debates, leading members of the Autonomist Party sailed to Madrid to meet with politicians, including the Prime Minister, Antonio Cánovas del Castillo, and the main force within the Liberal Party and former Prime Minister, Práxedes Mateo Sagasta. The meetings were by and large successful. The Prime Minister timidly advocated for more autonomy for Puerto Rico, and Sagasta signed a pact of collaboration with his Puerto Rican counterparts. While Puerto Rican autonomists were hard at work advancing their political project, the old revolutionary Ramón Emeterio Betances continued dreaming, scheming, and organizing from his exile in Paris. In the decades after El Grito de Lares, Betances served as a diplomat for the Dominican Republic, Haiti, and the Cuban revolutionaries.
Listen up.
He also helped organize two failed insurrections in Puerto Rico. One of them, known as the Intentona de Yauco, attempted coup of Yauco of 1897, was suppressed, and the other never took place. Betances was entering his last decade of life, but he remained a radical Republican committed to Puerto Rico's independence. His office in Paris was a meeting place for agitators and activists from across the political spectrum, including internationally renowned anarchists like Charles Malato. Betances.
You know what I realized listening to a lot of this? And it's not that it's just hitting me, it's just the reality, all right? A lot of our ancestors, our founding revolutionaries, they didn't believe in individualism. Like, they really believe in the concept of none of us are free until we're all free. Maybe they wasn't successful in freeing everybody in the capabilities that they wanted to, but the reality, that was the concept, that was the theory, right? None of us are free until we are free, and it's not just to the Caribbean islands. When you really do a deep dive into history and you start seeing the intersectionalities and the help and support of one another throughout the diaspora, throughout oppressed people, especially what they call the continent of the Americas, you really start seeing the intersectionalities. Like, we've really fallen victim to that divide and conquer aspect, where we really feel like our struggles has nothing to do with our neighbor struggles, when we neighbors, bro. Like, we're a product of one another. We come from the same shit. So, I mean, I just wanted to throw that out there.
Contact with anarchists was probably facilitated by his friend Louis Bonafou, who personally knew the internationally infamous Italian anarchist Enrico Malatesta. Betances' fame and credentials preceded him and made his office an obligatory stop for many radicals. And then, in 1897, an Italian anarchist knocked on his door. His name was Michele Angiolillo Lombardi. Both had reasons to despise the Spanish government. Betances hated the government of Cánovas del Castillo because of the war it was waging in Cuba. Angiolillo had a vendetta against the Spanish crown because they were known to torture and assassinate imprisoned anarchists. A few months prior to their meeting, Angiolillo had participated in a small gathering of 8 or 9 comrades. The meeting included former Montjuic prisoners Juan Bautista Oller, Francisco Gana, and Fernando Tarrida del Mármol. Instead of their usual fiery speeches, Gana used his body as propaganda. He took off his clothes to show the scars, marks, and deformities inflicted by the brutal Spanish regime. It is said that Angiolillo left the event with only a terse goodbye. His silence was fueled by anger and the desire to bring the perpetrators to justice. Not all anarchists agreed on tactics. Some favored organizing the laboring masses and disavowed the use of violence. For others, individual actions could advance larger social processes. In the latter group, some favored the use of revolutionary violence, which they named propaganda by the deed. It was a time when anarchist newspapers circulated throughout the world with instructions on how to build makeshift bombs.
I ain't gonna lie, we got like a bit of that going on nowadays, where we have a lot of individuals who glorify the revolutionary philosophies, ideologies, even, the actions taken back in the days, without understanding the true sacrifices that come with that. Like, I'm not saying don't jump out the window. You want to jump out the window, then jump out the window. Do what you got to do. But just understand the consequences that come with that. I think we put on a smile and, yeah, revolution. That shit is not a smile. That shit is not friendly. Growing up in the streets, I've seen a lot of shit in the city. I've seen a lot of violence. I've seen a lot of unalivings. Like, I've seen that shit growing up in the ghetto. And it's like, when you take a revolution, sometimes that shit is amplified by like 100. And what it takes to be able to free people and to free yourself and to free your nation, that shit's not done with pillows. It's not. It's really not.
With the advent of photography, some carried pictures of anarchists, as they would pictures of Catholic saints who had successfully murdered heads of state. Anarchists, real or imagined, were seen as a threat to Western governments. It was likely Betances' revolutionary credentials that led Angiolillo to request a meeting with him. What happened in that meeting can only be the source of speculation. It is known that Angiolillo confided his plan to assassinate young members of the Spanish royal family. Some scholars argue that Betances...
No, I'm not saying that, man, with a revolution, it's a mixture of everything. So what I'm saying is you know what, if we don't have, like, I believe every failure to every revolution came to without critiquing and analyzing and having the knowledge and education to see what's right in front of you, right? So without a plan and without, you know, a good strategy, if everything is just revolution, 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 like if we even study like the French Revolution, like the reason Napoleon was brought in is because they didn't have a plan and the people just kept revolting to a revolution, revolting, and not have a reason to exist. Like you're just on an ongoing journey of like nothingness. And that's what I think sometimes we gonna go into if we don't figure out, okay, what is what? How do we do this? How do we achieve this? If we always go gun ho, and that's the first thing we want to go through, I could tell you a lot of these individuals haven't seen, you know, violence to that nature in reality. Like, I really believe in maximum damage, minimum loss to life. You know, if we could try to figure out a way to, you know, not put our people in a position where we going to inflict that much damage. Like, I'm not saying that casuals don't happen and things don't happen, but that shouldn't be our primary focus. That shouldn't be our achievement. Not for nothing, the bully on the yard, when you only focus on bronze, the little smart dude gonna get over. Just because you physically stronger don't mean that the little underdog right there don't have the capability to figure out how to hurt you. But you just going in there with the bronze and thinking that you strong, like that's not gonna work because there's ways around it. I don't know if I went in a tangent, ran, if it made sense or it didn't make sense, but like I said, I don't think a lot of us are ready for the reality of what comes with a revolution. And we can go on the internet. YouTube shows a lot of this shit. You can go look at places that are going through their revolutions. Like you can go through, you know, look what war looks like, man. Look what we did 20 years in the Middle East, what the United States did. Like, look at those footages are starting to come now, and the United States want us to suppress it so much because they realize that the U.S. population really seen the level of violence that they're committing in the name of decade justice, that we wouldn't approve of it.
Dissuaded Angiolillo from murdering members of the Spanish crown, but instead suggested the assassination of Cánovas del Castillo. After all, it was the prime minister who was responsible for the repression of the anarchist movement in Spain. He was also in charge of sending Valeriano Güeller, a general put in charge of the Spanish military forces against Cuban revolutionaries, who quickly earned the name of the Butcher, to Cuba. While certainty might be impossible, it seems that Betances did not formally agree with Angiolillo. However, a few days after their encounter, the amount of money Angiolillo had asked of Betances to finance his trip mysteriously arrived at his apartment. Perhaps that is why Betances would proudly tell his visitors during his last years of life, "In the chair you are sitting, once sat Angiolillo." In August 1897, Cánovas del Castillo, prime minister and the best-known conservative politician in Spain, made a trip to the Santa Águeda de Mondragón spa. The warm baths were a treatment for his glycosuria. The prime minister was traveling with his wife, Joaquina de Osma, 9 police officers, and 25 civil guards. A 26-year-old by the name of Emilio Rinaldi also checked into the spa. He was a bookseller and writing for the Italian newspaper Il Popolo. The name and profession were false, of course. This was Angiolillo's pseudonym and fake identity. Once there, Angiolillo studied the prime minister's every move. On August 8, 1897, he saw an opportunity and took it. Cánovas del Castillo was sitting on the patio by himself. Around noon, Angiolillo went upstairs to get his revolver and a pair of boots that would muffle the sound of his steps. He rushed to the patio and, without saying a word, shot the prime minister in the right temple and the neck. As the body fell to the ground, Angiolillo took his third and last shot, firing at the prime minister's back. Cánovas del Castillo had said he only needed 3 bullets to end the war in Cuba. 1 for José Martí, one for Máximo Gómez, and the last one for Antonio Maceo. Ironically, Angiolillo ended Canovas's life with 3 of the 4 bullets in his own revolver. When approached by Canovas's wife and police officers, he surrendered calmly and said, "I have accomplished my duty and I am calmed. I have avenged my brothers in Montjuic." Perhaps unknowingly, Angiolillo's actions triggered a series of events that eventually shaped Puerto Rico's history. In the coming months, Praxedes Mateo Sagasta became the new prime minister and reconfigured the Spanish government. Soon after taking office, he released most of the Montjuic prisoners. He also granted amnesty to Puerto Rican and Cuban political prisoners and removed General Valeriano Güellar from his position. Most importantly for our story, on November 9th, 1897, Queen Regent Maria Isabel II signed a series of decrees that extended the Spanish Constitution to Puerto Rico, granted male suffrage to adults older than 25, and allowed the creation of an autonomous government in Puerto Rico. As historian Mark Bray has noted, one could argue that Angiolillo's assassination was the most effective act of propaganda by the deed carried out by an anarchist during the era. 2 weeks later, on November 25, 1897, an autonomic charter was approved for both Cuba and Puerto Rico. While the Cubans, on the verge of winning their 3-decade struggle for independence, rejected the charter, autonomists celebrated it as a victory in Puerto Rico. The celebration, however, was brief. If 3 bullets consolidated Puerto Rico's autonomy, a bombing of its capital sealed its colonial future.
And that was a good chapter. We're gonna end the book on that note today. We got about 7 hours left, so I like to break them down into about an hour and a half. The next chapter is going to put us like almost in the 2-hour mark, and I think our attention spans as humans are very minimum. So I'm trying to keep the lives short, brief, and straight to the point. I appreciate all the love and support. Like I said, I'm just out here trying to share some information with you guys. I don't proclaim myself to be a teacher or professor. I'm just an individual sharing information throughout my journey with individuals who I feel like going to enjoy it. And the ones who want to enjoy it is the individuals who stick around and support me. And I really appreciate that. Without further ado, I do want to end it. I like to start and end it with my poems lately. So I'm going to end it with my poem. This is my tribute to Pedro Petri's Puerto Rican obituary. This is Puerto Rican Resurrection. So if you guys could do me a favor, show me some love, tap the screen. Let's get the likes up before we end it out.
During these past couple of years, hasn't been easy. Good, bad, or indifferent, it was worth it. Throughout my journey, I had so many inspirations, so many things that made me see things in a different light, even view myself from a different perspective, understanding that I don't have to be just another statistic, that I can seek to be who I want to be, not who they set out for me to be.
Facts.
With that being said, this is my response to the legendary Pedro Petri's Puerto Rican obituary, Puerto Rican Resurrection. Hold up, what's going on? We've let too much time pass. It's been going on for far too long, struggling just to survive. Things seem so wrong. We worked, we were always on time. We were never late, just trying to survive. If it wasn't for Juan, Miguel, Milagro, Olga, Manuel, I would still be in denial. All dying for an American dream, waiting for their lottery numbers to hit. The promotion that never came and a system that never gave a fuck from the beginning. So understanding and learning everything they struggled through, why do we continue to keep the cycle going? While screaming, yo soy boricua, pa que tú lo sepa. Please tell me, what good does that do if we continue to contribute to the system that has us where we're at? And I'm not saying you gotta be the next Captain Puerto Rico, I'm not saying all that. But let's look at the facts. So from 1493, until 1898, Spain ruled the island of Borinquen, and within that time, we'd had massive genocide. So many people died on both sides. And what do I mean by both sides? Our Afro and Taino side that we could never deny because we hold with so much pride everything they went through just to survive, while the conquistadors took the whole island on a ride, committing so many criminal acts that words can never describe. 1898, here comes big old Tío Sam, el savior de Puerto Rico, decreasing the currency by 40%. Cause who needs to survive when you got Tío Sam's checks by your side? Can't forget about the imposement of citizenship, forcing us to rely, while Tío Sam takes a ride on the road of taxation without representation, and that comes with a lot of exploitation. Oh, what a great nation of which we reside. But what I realize, if you remove us from history, we don't see a future. This is why it's important to understand who is Pedro Avisu Campos, who is Arturo Alfonso Chambre, who is Lolita Lebron, who is Ramon Emeterio Betances, who is Mariana Bracetti, who are the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party, who are the Young Lords. All representation of greatness, all in their own right. But we are them and they are us, fighting for the same cause, liberation, self-determination, with no limitations. So we won't be dying, hating the make-believe steaks or the bulletproof rice and beans, or waiting for the supervisor to die to get that promotion.
Facts.
We will die freeing our bodies without having to use physical strength, but by arming ourselves with knowledge and education, not just for now, but for the future. Viva Puerto Rico libre, pa'lante, siempre pa'lante.
Woo, bars, 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 bars. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the live today. Like I said, please go on YouTube, Afro Taino 88. You will find all these videos, all the lives are on YouTube, Afro Taino 88. So please do me a favor, if you're on TikTok and you want to be able to catch up with some of the content you guys missed, or you want to go revisit some of the books that you've listened to with me prior, please, it's on YouTube. Go to the live section on my profile, and you will see Puerto Rican with the War Against All Puerto Ricans, the Huey P. Newton Reader, and now we're adding Puerto Rico national history to our collection. The next book that I'm going to work on, like I told you guys yesterday, my two favorite books to be able to teach history from beginning until present day, and I wish more countries and places would teach this history. Or maybe I just got to come across it, or maybe they haven't uploaded it onto Audible, which I got to get my hands on other books. But will be Cuba, an American history, Cuba. That's going to be the next book, because it kind of goes on the same dynamics that this is going through. Is it goes to the indigenous people, and then the Spanish, and then so on and so forth, to Fidel, to after Fidel, to kind of like more or less give or take 10-15 years modern day aspect. So I'm looking forward to that. That's actually one of my favorite books, even though I'm not Cuban. Salute to Cuba, free Palestine, free the Congo, free Puerto Rico. I'm going to catch you guys later. Stay positive, productive. I'm about to go play some Call of Duty for a little while to release some of my stress. So stay positive. One.